Okay, we are back. I am very happy to have back on the Goldstein on Gelt show Betty Shotton, who specializes in the field of values-driven leadership. She spoke to us last time about her book Liftoff Leadership. And Betty, today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about flying. How you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'd love to talk to you about flying.
I thought you would. You talk
Yeah.
about flying and leadership and finding your center of gravity. What's that all about?
Well, the center of gravity, I've been writing some about the center of gravity as it relates to business and careers and the way we run our lives. And the center of gravity is in a plane or a boat, or like, I guess the best visual is a seesaw, is a point where the mass around that point is equally distributed so that there's balance. So if you have the center of gravity at the right place in a plane or on a seesaw, then you're not going to tip over. So I use the analogy of center of gravity to remind leaders and investors, and even in our personal lives, that we need to be aware of imbalances and extremes and always come back to a center point where we're kind of even keeled.
Well, that sounds like the wisdom of years. Before I ask you more questions on that, tell me, how did you come up with this model or this metaphor?
Well, I've been in aviation, and I'm a commercial ATP pilot, and I've had a couple airlines, and I had an experience one time. We just bought a twin engine airplane that we were putting on our certificate as the airline, and we hadn't taken it on a commercial flight with passengers. And it was my job to calculate the center of gravity, which is really important in planes and in aviation because you've got passengers and luggage and fuel, and you need to load things and make sure that a plane is always stable and the center of gravity is what will tell you that. So I calculated the numbers, ran it by people and looked like it was good. Well, we loaded the plane up with passengers and luggage, and the tail hit the tarmac. And we're like, I looked at this more experienced guy, and I'm like, what's up with this? And he's like, I don't know. It's a new plane. It must be just kind of the way the plane is. I'm like, okay. Well, we got in the plane and rolled down, took off, and as soon as I took off, I was at the controls. I could feel it. I don't know if you've ever been in a boat where you're going up and down with waves, and it makes you feel seasick.
Sure.
Well, in a plane, it's even worse. If a plane is out of balance, you can feel it right away in your stomach, and it's just the lack of equilibrium is up. Well, I knew something was wrong, and so did my co-pilot, who was a long-term American airline pilot. And we got up to altitude and trimmed the plane out, and people started throwing up
Oh, no.
in the back of the plane, and then I really knew something was wrong. So we had people move forward. We took luggage out of the back and moved it forward. We readjusted everything and did what we could in flight to stabilize the plane. And we landed safely, and everybody got off, and they were thrilled to get through with that flight. And the pilots, we all went and huddled and looked at the numbers and looked to see what went wrong, and found that I had used the wrong chart. It looked like the right chart, but it wasn't the right chart. And the center of gravity was what they call out of the envelope. So that really drove home to me the potential consequences of things being out of balance. And I know that same situation happens in investment markets. It happens in the conduct of business. It happens in our own personal careers and in our own personal lives, that we often get to where we're out on edges and it's dangerous, and we need to come back and balance in the center.
All right. So the fact is, I see this as well. My day job is that I'm an investment advisor, and I talk with clients. We do financial planning. We put together portfolios. But people sometimes like to live outside the envelope a little bit, or they're not even willing to admit that it exists until such time as they might actually crash and burn. How do you teach people this concept?
Well, there's nothing like experience to be the teacher, huh?
Yeah, but you don't want to crash a plane, and I don't want to see a client crash his portfolio.
Yeah, exactly. But I think as like from my standpoint, I've been through a lot of experience with a lot of risks and failures, and I'm out there now sharing what I've learned so that others don't have to go through it. And in your advisory capacity, are one that can be trusted and advise people when they're too far out, and give them the benefit of your experience that they're hitting a tipping point. But in the end, people sometimes have to crash and burn, so to speak, on their own.
Right, that is true. That's certainly something that people talk about in terms of money and teaching people about money. We're talking with Betty Shotton, who is an expert in what's referred to as values-driven leadership. She's the author of Liftoff Leadership, 10 Principles for Exceptional Leadership, and she's probably most famously known for having previously been a guest on the Goldstein on Gelt show.
Yeah,
Betty,
that was my biggest moment of fame.
That's
Thank you.
true. How often do you get to be in Israel? At least on the radio. So
Exactly, not often.
So let's focus on this balance thing a little bit, because one of the things in portfolio design is understanding that different people have a different center of gravity, I would guess, or a different balance in terms of, for example, their stock and bond allocation in a portfolio. Is there a way that you would suggest people begin to examine themselves or their portfolio, sort of using your perspective as an expert, at least as an expert in flying, if not in many other things as well?
Well, yes, I mean, from a portfolio standpoint, I would start with a conversation with my advisor, someone like you, and make sure that I understand the risk associated with the different parts of my portfolio, whether it's cash or bonds or stocks or derivatives or even real estate, and that I am knowledgeable. And I think that's one thing that I focus on when I talk about these balances for businesses and leaders is what I call the counting side, or the numerical, financial, intellectual side of business, that you understand what your portfolio is about from an academic, intellectual, financial side.
Boy, that's critical. Yeah. Let me just note, and we had on the show a little while back Jim Rogers, who's a world-famous investor, a multi-gazillionaire, and he's really been one of the top voices on Wall Street. And I was trying to get some opinions from him about different ideas, and he just kept stressing exactly what you're saying, which is don't invest in something until you understand what you're getting involved in.
Right. So, you've got to understand, and the same with business, people go into businesses, and I always say, you can't just have a good idea or think something. You need the structure. You need the science part of it down. So from a portfolio standpoint, once you have that knowledge, then I think you need to have an understanding of your own personal situation and where you're going. So, for me at 61, I don't want to be loaded with high risk types of investments. My appetite for risk at this point is probably medium. So I need to be aware of that and bring that into the equation, is your own life, your own goals, your own objectives, where you're headed, and what you're willing to handle. And I would suspect, I think that people intuitively know when they're pushing the envelope. So go ahead.
I think that's very true to some extent, but you're referring only in the singular. One of the things that I see, I often make a joke with people that I'm more of a marriage counselor than an investment advisor, because it's so common that one of the spouses will come in and he'll be a risk taker and she'll be more conservative, or vice versa. And it does happen both ways. So it's not just a question of what you think, it's really a question of what the two of you think, and that's really hard to bring together sometimes.
Well, I have a very quick practical tip for that.
Okay.
And it's when you're in a relationship like that, when there are two people who are trying to balance, their different interests or desires, the question would be is, what would the relationship vote for? So introduce a third party into that twosome, make it a triumvirate, so that you've got, and let's just say it's husband-wife, and then the marriage, or the relationship itself. So get 3 votes in.
Oh, sorry, can you just explain a little bit practically how it sounds like a good idea, but how would we apply that?
Well, if you've got two, if you have can we use a husband-wife example?
Perfect.
So you've got a husband and wife, and they're looking at their portfolio with you, and she wants more money. She wants a lot more money because of whatever reasons. And he's like, I want to quit working soon, and I want to be more conservative and build this thing. Then then say, okay, well, what would our relationship want? What would the relationship vote for? So it's looking beyond each other and individual needs to what's the best thing for our family, our relationship, our future. It's putting a third thing into the equation.
Okay, that sounds like a really good way to in fact, even look at it like an equation, and that you're trying to find a lot of balance in it. We've been talking to Betty Shotton, who it really seems is an expert in balance in so many different areas. Betty, I'm very sorry to say, but we're just about out of time. In the last few seconds, just can you tell us, how can people continue to follow your work?
Well, I have a website called Liftoff Leadership, spelled just exactly like it sounds, Liftoff and Leadership. And I really focus on that as a resource for leaders, for executives, for investors, to give them practical tools, to give them insights from the research that I do. So if you go to that website, there will be a lot of information to help you as you navigate your own investments, your own business, your own career. And that's what it's there for, Liftoff Leadership.
Okay, that sounds great. We'll put a link to that on the show notes at goldsteinongelt.com. Betty, thanks so much again for joining us on the Goldstein on Gelt show. I hope we'll see you again here soon.
You are so welcome, and I enjoyed it. Thanks, Doug.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt show.